"Honey, we can't get into the house! Your crazy mother changed the locks!" My daughter-in-law, Camille's shriek cut through the air like an ambulance siren, and I, standing behind the curtains of my window, knew this was only the beginning of the biggest storm of our lives. She had been standing in front of her house gate for 2 hours, a full 2 hours, screaming like a madwoman, her pink blouse wrinkled with sweat and her hair plastered to her forehead. By 8 p.m., when my son Josiah finally arrived at my house in a fury after finding his wife hysterical and tried to open my door to confront me, they had another surprise neither of them expected. But that comes later, because first I need to tell you how we got to this point of no return. My name is Monica. I'm 64 years old, and I'm the mother-in-law who supposedly ruined the life of this dramatic creature I call my daughter-in-law. Indeed, I changed the locks on the house where she and my son live, but I have very powerful reasons that go far beyond what anyone could imagine. During those endless 2 hours of screaming, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Ring, ring, ring. One call after another, which I let go straight to voicemail because I knew exactly who it was and what she wanted. My hands trembled every time I saw the screen light up with Josiah's name, knowing that each missed call increased his fury and that soon I would have to face the consequences of my actions. By 3 p.m., my phone already showed 73 missed calls and 45 text messages filled with insults that broke my heart every time I read them. "Mom, what the hell did you do? Camille is crying hysterically," one said. "This can't be happening. I need an explanation now," another one yelled. Each word was a direct stab to the soul, especially coming from my only son, the boy I raised alone after his father abandoned us when he was just 8 years old. Camille was still out there like a caged beast, now accompanied by Regina, my neighbor from across the street, who was trying uselessly to calm her down while offering her a glass of water, which she refused with violent swats. "I don't want water. I want this crazy old woman to give me back the keys to my house," Camille screamed, pointing towards my window with pure hatred in her eyes. Her voice had grown hoarse from so much shouting, but that didn't stop her. She paced back and forth in front of the gate like a wild animal, kicking stones and tearing out the flowers I myself had planted in the entryway planter. Every petal I saw fall to the ground felt like a small betrayal. One more sign of the disrespect this woman had for everything I valued. The other neighbors began peeking out their windows, whispering among themselves and discreetly pointing at the scandal unfolding on our quiet residential street. Claudia, the neighbor from the corner, approached slowly with that poorly disguised expression of curiosity people adopt when they smell someone else's drama. "What's going on here, honey?" she asked Camille in a honeyed voice, but I knew she only wanted fresh gossip to tell at the grocery store tomorrow morning. "My crazy mother-in-law changed the locks on our house while we were out," Camille replied, wiping her nose with the back of her hand like a spoiled child. "We've been living there for 3 years, paying the bills, and now we can't even get in." Her story sounded so convincing, so full of righteous indignation, that even I would have felt sorry for her if I didn't know the whole truth. What none of those women knew, what no one in the entire neighborhood could imagine, was that I had irrefutable proof of something that would completely change everyone's perception of this situation. For months, I had been watching, documenting, and gathering evidence of things that broke my heart, but that I needed to face sooner or later. The sound of my phone interrupted my thoughts again, and this time when I saw Josiah's name on the screen, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding this conversation. My son was about to arrive home, furious and full of reproaches, not knowing that the real surprise was just beginning. The roar of Josiah's truck engine echoed down the street like the announcement of an approaching storm. From my window, I saw him get out of the vehicle with abrupt, violent movements, slamming the door so hard that the metallic sound echoed between the houses. His work shirt was soaked with sweat. His tie was loose around his neck, and that expression on his face that I hadn't seen since he was a rebellious teenager, and I caught him smoking behind the school. Camille ran toward him like a child who has found her savior, gesturing dramatically as she pointed alternately toward their locked house and my window, where I was still hidden behind the curtains like a criminal. "Josiah, thank God you're here!" Camille cried, hanging on his arm with the theatricality that characterized her in moments of crisis. "Your mom has gone completely nuts. She changed our locks while we were shopping at the mall." Her words came out in sobs that sounded phonier than a $3 bill. But my son, blinded by fury and exhaustion after a grueling day in construction, swallowed every word as if it were gospel. I saw him clench his fists, tighten his jaw, and walk toward my door with that determination he inherited from his father, the same man who abandoned us when things got tough. "Mom, open this door right now!" His voice cut through the walls of my house like thunder, and I felt as if my heart was going to jump out of my chest. Each knock on the wooden door resonated in my bones, reminding me of the days when he was little and would run into my arms every time he had a nightmare. "I know you're in there. Your neighbor Regina told me you've been spying from the window all afternoon." Indeed, Regina the gossip hadn't wasted any time reporting my every move, as if she were a professional spy hired to monitor my activities. I took a deep breath, adjusted my cream-colored dress that I had chosen especially for this day, and walked slowly toward the door. My legs trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what I was about to unleash. For months, I had planned this moment. I had visualized every word, every reaction, every possible outcome of this confrontation I knew was inevitable. My hand rested on the golden doorknob that I had polished that very morning, as if it knew it would be the silent protagonist of this family drama. "Josiah, my son," I said in a calm voice as I slowly opened the door. "I knew you'd come." My son was momentarily bewildered by my tranquility. He expected screams, desperate defenses, perhaps the tears of an old woman overwhelmed by circumstances. Instead, he was met with a serene, almost smiling mother who looked at him with that expression she used when he was a child and had done some mischief, but she already knew the whole truth. "What the hell is going on here, Mom?" he asked, unconsciously lowering his voice, confused by my unexpected attitude. Camille stepped forward, pushing him slightly, her eyes red and swollen from so much crying, or at least that's what she wanted us to believe. "Explain why you left us locked out of our own house," she screamed, pointing her index finger at me as if I were the villain in some cheap soap opera. "We've been paying the mortgage, the electric bills, the water, everything for 3 years. That house is ours by right." Her voice broke on the last sentence, and I saw how some neighbors who had approached discreetly to listen began to nod sympathetically toward her. Claudia murmured something about poor young people, while Regina shook her head as if witnessing the greatest injustice in the world. "You're right, Camille," I said calmly, and I saw her eyes light up for a moment, believing she had won the battle without a fight. "That house has been maintained for 3 years with regular payments. That's completely true." My son looked at me with relief, thinking that I was finally coming to my senses, and that this whole drama had been a misunderstanding between old people. "But there are some things about those payments that I think we should clarify right here in front of all our neighbors who have been so kind to come and witness this spectacle." The smile slowly faded from Camille's face like makeup in the rain. Something in my tone of voice, something in the way I pronounced the word clarify, made her understand that this conversation was not going to unfold as she had planned. Josiah looked at me with that confused expression of someone who feels they are losing control of a situation they thought they understood perfectly. The neighbors moved a little closer, forming an involuntary semicircle around us, like spectators at an open-air theater where the most dramatic performance of their lives was about to begin. "Mom, just give her back the keys and we'll talk about this more calmly tomorrow," Josiah suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the audience that had formed. "We don't need to resolve this in front of the whole neighborhood." Poor my son, he still didn't understand that some secrets are so big they need witnesses for the truth to be credible. "Son," I said softly, "there are times in life when the truth needs sunlight to grow completely. Josiah, before I return any keys, I need to ask you a very important question." I said, as I slowly pulled my phone from the pocket of my cream-colored dress. Have you personally been paying the mortgage on that house for these 3 years? My son looked at me as if I had just asked him something completely obvious, with that expression of impatience he adopted when he thought I was wasting his time with unnecessary questions. Of course I have, Mom. Camille and I have been splitting all the expenses since we moved in together. What are you getting at? Camille nodded vigorously, wiping away tears with the back of her hand as she looked at the neighbors for moral support. Exactly. We both work. We both contribute. We both built that home together. That's why I don't understand this craziness of changing the locks. Her voice sounded convincing, full of righteous indignation, and I saw Regina and Claudia exchange glances of understanding, clearly siding with the young couple against the seemingly irrational mother-in-law. The circle of neighbors had grown. It now included Araceli from the Yellow House and a couple of people I didn't recognize, but who obviously didn't want to miss the drama of the year in our quiet neighborhood. Perfect, I replied, with a smile that made Camille look at me with suspicion for the first time since this whole spectacle began. Then you'll have no problem explaining this to me. I slid my finger across the phone screen and showed the first image, a screenshot of a bank statement. This is the mortgage account, son. As you can see, for the last 3 years, every monthly payment of $1,250 has been automatically debited from my savings account, not yours. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Josiah squinted, leaning in to examine the screen more closely, while Camille stood completely motionless, like a marble statue that had just been struck by lightning. "That has to be a mistake," my son stammered, but his voice no longer sounded as sure as before. "We give you the money every month. You're just the intermediary because the house is in your name for insurance reasons." His explanation sounded reasonable, and I saw some neighbors feel relieved that there was a logical explanation for this family confusion. "Oh, yes, the money you give me every month," I repeated slowly, savoring each word as I moved to the next screenshot. "Let me show you where that money you think you're contributing really comes from." The new image showed a series of bank transfers, all from my personal account to the joint account Josiah shared with Camille. As you can see here, on the 15th of every month, I transferred $1,000 to your account, and on the 30th of every month, another $1,000. That's $2,000 a month that I put into your account, of which you give me back $1,250 for the mortgage. The color completely drained from Camille's face, as if someone had turned off a faucet in her veins. Her lips moved without making a sound, like a fish out of water, while her eyes darted desperately between my phone and my son's increasingly confused face. Wait, Josiah said, running a hand through his hair, as he always did when he was trying to process complicated information. "Are you saying that you've been putting money into our account and we're giving you back part of that same money to pay for the house?" "Not just part, son," I continued, sliding to more screenshots that I had meticulously prepared for months. "In fact, you give me back less money than I put in. I deposit $2,000, you give me $1,250 for the mortgage, which means every month you keep $750 of my own money, in addition to me still paying the difference for the full mortgage." The math was simple, but devastating, and I saw comprehension slowly dawn in my son's eyes, like sunrise after a very dark night. Regina took a step closer, squinting to see my phone screen better. "Are you saying you've been financially supporting your son and his wife for 3 years without them knowing it?" she asked with a mixture of disbelief and fascination that only neighbors experienced in family dramas can show. "Not only that," I replied, preparing for the revelation that I knew would completely destroy the version of reality Camille had so carefully built. "I've also been paying the electricity, water, internet, Camille's car note, and even the grocery shopping on weekends." "That's impossible!" Camille finally screamed, finding her voice after several minutes of deadly silence. "We pay our own bills. I work at the boutique. Josiah works in construction. We have our own income." Her desperation was so palpable, it almost made me feel sorry for her, but I had come too far to back down now. Of course you have your own income, I agreed softly. The question is, what have you been spending all that money on if I've been paying all your basic expenses for 3 years? Josiah stared fixedly at Camille, as if it was the first time he had ever seen her. Camille, he said slowly, is this true? Did you know my mom was paying our expenses? The question hung in the air like a time bomb, and everyone present held their breath, waiting for the answer that would define the course of this family confrontation. Camille opened and closed her mouth several times, her eyes darting nervously between all the expectant faces, like an actress who had just completely forgotten her lines in the middle of the most important performance of her career. I didn't, Camille stammered, stepping back as if the words were projectiles aimed directly at her. Her eyes moved frantically from side to side, desperately looking for an escape from the trap she had just fallen into. But every second of silence only made her guilt more obvious to everyone present. Of course I didn't know. Your mom never told us any of this, she finally screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. If she wanted to help us financially, she should have told us from the beginning. Josiah stared at her with an expression I had never seen on his face, a mixture of confusion, betrayal, and something that looked dangerously close to disgust. But Camille, he said slowly, if we thought we were paying our own expenses with our money, where are our paychecks? You make $900 at the boutique. I make $1,300 in construction. That's $2,200 a month. If we weren't paying the mortgage or the bills or the groceries, what happened to all that money? The silence that followed was so tense that even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. The neighbors exchanged meaningful glances, clearly realizing that they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple family dispute over locks. Camille had gone completely pale, and small beads of sweat began to form on her forehead, even though the afternoon had cooled considerably. That's exactly the right question, son, I said softly, preparing for the most painful part of this whole revelation. And I have the answer. I slid my finger across the phone screen until I reached a folder I had simply titled Evidence. You see, about 6 months ago, something started to seem strange to me. Camille always seemed to have money to buy new clothes, expensive shoes, those designer purses that cost more than you make in a week. At first, I thought maybe she had gotten a raise at the boutique, or that she was saving her salary very well. I opened the first image in the folder, a photograph I had discreetly taken of Camille leaving a jewelry store at the mall, carrying several elegant bags. This photo is from last month. According to my investigations, she spent approximately $800 on jewelry that day. The next image showed Camille in an exclusive downtown restaurant, toasting with champagne glasses that cost $30 each. And this one is from 3 weeks ago at the most expensive restaurant in the city. The bill that night was $250. That doesn't prove anything, Camille protested, but her voice sounded increasingly desperate. I have the right to spend my money however I want. I work hard, and I deserve to treat myself once in a while. Regina and Claudia exchanged a look that clearly said, "This woman is losing her mind," while Araceli shook her head as if she were watching a particularly dramatic soap opera. Of course you have the right to spend your money, I agreed kindly. The problem is, it wasn't your money. I slid to the next series of images, and this time I saw Josiah visibly tense up. These are photographs of your credit card statements, Camille. It turns out that during these 3 years, you have accumulated a debt of $23,000 in personal purchases, clothes, restaurants, weekend trips with your friends, beauty treatments, and a surprising amount of money spent at online casinos. Josiah's face transformed completely. Confusion gave way to disbelief, and then to a cold anger that reminded me painfully of his father in the worst moments of our marriage. $23,000, he repeated slowly, as if the words were poison in his mouth. $23,000 in debt that I didn't even know existed. That's an invasion of privacy, Camille screamed. But now her voice sounded more like that of a child caught in a lie than an adult woman defending her rights. You had no right to investigate my personal finances. She turned to Josiah with tears streaming down her cheeks, but these tears were different from before. They were no longer of indignation or frustration, but of pure panic. "Josiah, don't listen to her. She's trying to separate us. She's always hated me from day one." "Actually," I continued, completely ignoring her protests, "I have every right in the world to investigate how the money I'm providing is being spent." I opened the next image, which showed a series of bank transfers. You see, it turns out Camille found a very creative way to access additional funds. Every time I deposited money into your joint account, she immediately transferred significant amounts to a personal account that Josiah knew nothing about. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the neighbors, who had been whispering among themselves throughout the confrontation, went completely quiet. Josiah looked alternately at my phone and Camille's increasingly desperate face, as if he were trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. "That's not all," I continued, knowing the time had come to reveal the deepest betrayal. "Francisco, would you come closer, please?" I called out to the corner of the street, where a middle-aged man in a suit had been observing the whole scene from a respectful distance. He approached slowly, carrying a brown leather folder that had been waiting for this moment to arrive. "Josiah," Francisco said in a professional voice, "I am your mother's private accountant and also a certified notary. For the last 3 months, I have been helping her document a quite complex financial situation." He opened the folder and took out several official documents. "What your mother hasn't told you yet is that Camille has been forging your signature on financial documents. Specifically, she has applied for 3 different loans, using your name as a co-signer for a total of an additional $18,000. The world seemed to have stopped completely. Josiah staggered backward as if he had received a physical blow and had to lean against the wall of my house to keep his balance. "What? What are you saying?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own ragged breathing. Camille had begun to back away slowly, like a cornered animal looking for an escape route. "That's completely false!" she screamed. But now even the most sympathetic neighbors were beginning to move away from her. "They're making all of this up to make me look bad. Josiah, my love, you have to believe me. We're a family." "A family," I repeated slowly, "doesn't steal. A family doesn't lie. A family doesn't forge legal documents." I looked directly into my son's eyes, watching all the trust he had built for 3 years crumble like a house of cards. "Son, the reason I changed the locks wasn't out of cruelty. It was because I discovered that Camille had been planning to sell some of the furniture and appliances in the house to pay off her debts, without your knowledge and without my permission." Francisco opened his folder completely and began pulling out documents one by one, like a magician revealing increasingly impressive tricks. "I have here copies of the sales contracts that Camille had signed with a downtown pawn shop," he said in a firm, professional voice. "The large screen TV, the sound system, the kitchen appliances, and even the family jewelry that Monica had lent her for special occasions. The total value of the items she planned to sell was approximately $2,000. Josiah slowly slid down the wall until he was sitting on my front step with his head in his hands, as if the whole weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders. "It can't be true," he muttered over and over again, rocking back and forth like a child trying to comfort himself. "This can't be happening. It can't be that my whole life for 3 years has been a complete lie." "They're fake documents!" Camille screamed with a desperation bordering on hysteria. "She paid that man to make up this whole story." She pointed a trembling finger at Francisco, but even as she spoke, I could see in her eyes that she knew the game was over. "Josiah, my love, you know me. Do you really believe I would be capable of something like this? We've been together for 3 years. We've built a life together." "A life built on my back," I said firmly, feeling the anger I had been holding back for months finally begin to emerge. "A life completely financed with my money, while you two lived in a fantasy where you thought you were independent and self-sufficient." I looked at my son, who still had his head bowed, and I felt a pang of pain in my heart for everything he was about to lose. "Josiah, son, For 3 years, I have watched you come home proud. Because you thought you were providing for your family, I've seen you work double shifts on weekends to secure your future with Camille. All that pride, all that effort, was based on a delusion she deliberately created. Francisco cleared his throat and pulled another document from his inexhaustible folder. I also have here the records of a secret savings account that Camille opened 2 years ago, he continued, with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. In this account, she has been regularly depositing amounts that match exactly with the money left over after you paid the monthly expenses. This account currently has a balance of $700, money that comes directly from the funds Monica provided to you. The neighbors had now formed a complete circle around us, and their murmurs had intensified into a constant buzz of shock and disapproval. Regina shook her head repeatedly while whispering, "Oh, what a shame! What a shame!" like a mantra. Claudia's eyes were wide, clearly fascinated by the drama unfolding, better than any soap opera she had ever watched. Araceli had taken out her phone and seemed to be discreetly recording, probably to tell her entire extended family about the biggest scandal she had witnessed in decades. "But that's not the worst of it," I continued, knowing that the final revelation would be the one that would finally break any possibility of reconciliation. "Francisco, show them the evidence of the infidelity." The accountant nodded gravely and took out a series of photographs that had cost me a fortune in a private investigator, but had been worth every penny. "These photographs were taken during the last 6 weeks at the downtown Continental Hotel," he said. The images clearly showed Camille entering and leaving the hotel with a man who was definitely not my son. A well-dressed, middle-aged man with an expensive sports car parked outside. In some photos, they were kissing passionately in the parking lot. In others, they were sharing intimate dinners at the hotel restaurant. The most devastating of all showed Camille wearing a diamond necklace she clearly couldn't afford on her boutique salary. "Who is he?" Josiah asked with a broken voice, finally raising his head to look at the photographs Francisco had spread out like cards on a poker table. His eyes were red, but no longer from confusion, but from a rage that grew like a fire fueled by pure oxygen. "Who is this man who appears in all these photos with my wife?" "His name is Roberto Alvarez," Francisco replied, consulting his notes. "He's the 52-year-old owner of a chain of restaurants, and he's divorced. According to our investigations, Camille met him approximately 8 months ago when he visited the boutique where she works. Since then, she has maintained a relationship that includes regular trips, expensive dinners, and costly gifts that she is hiding in that secret savings account I mentioned earlier." Camille had backed up so much that she was now practically pressed against Josiah's truck with the wild eyes of a cornered animal. "Those photos are faked," she screamed, but her voice broke on the last word. "They can do anything with computers nowadays. You can't believe anything you see in photographs." Her lies sounded desperate even to herself, and I saw the last traces of credibility fade from her face like makeup in the rain. "Roberto has been very generous with Camille," I continued relentlessly. "In fact, he has been helping her plan her future, a future that included divorcing you, Josiah, but not before making sure she could keep the house and everything in it." I took out my own phone and played an audio recording I had obtained through methods I preferred not to explain. Camille's voice was unmistakable. "I just need to hold on for a few more months until I can divorce him and get the house. Roberto says once I'm free, we can start our life together with no financial problems." The impact of that recording was like an emotional nuclear bomb. Josiah slowly stood up, staggering slightly, and walked toward Camille with an expression I had never seen on his face. It wasn't just anger. It was something much deeper and more devastating. It was the complete realization that the person he had trusted most in the world had betrayed him on every possible level. 3 years, he said in a dangerously calm voice. 3 years of my life. 3 years of working like a slave to support a woman who was not only stealing from me, but was planning to leave me after taking everything she could get. He stopped in front of her, so close he could see the tears running down her cheeks. but these tears no longer had any effect on him. "Did you ever love me? Even a little? Or was it all part of the plan from the beginning?" Camille opened her mouth to reply, but no sound came out. The words had run out, the excuses were gone, and she was finally facing the reality of what she had done. The circle of neighbors had grown to include almost the entire block, and everyone was looking at her with a mixture of disgust and morbid fascination that made her look smaller with every second that passed. Camille finally found her voice, but when she spoke, the words that came out of her mouth were the most devastating she could have chosen. "Yes, I loved you at the beginning," she cried out in desperation, as if that partial admission could somehow save the situation. "But you were never going to be enough for me. You work in construction, Josiah. Your future is limited. Roberto can give me the life I really deserve, the life I always dreamed of having." Her words fell on the group like hail on glass, shattering any sympathy that might have remained among the spectators. Regina dramatically put her hand to her chest and muttered, "Oh my God, what a horrible creature!" while Claudia shook her head repeatedly as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Araceli had stopped pretending she wasn't recording and was now shamelessly pointing her phone at Camille, capturing every moment of this public confession that would become the biggest gossip in the neighborhood for the next 5 years. Josiah backed away as if Camille's words were physical punches. "I was never going to be enough," he repeated slowly, his voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and deep pain. "Working honestly, building a life step by step, loving truly, none of that was enough for you." He ran his hands through his hair, pulling at it in frustration. "Do you know what it's like to get up at 5 in the morning every day? To work under the sun until every muscle in your body aches, just to come home and feel proud that you're building something real with the person you love?" "That's exactly the problem," Camille screamed, and at that moment I realized she had completely lost control of her words. "I don't want a life of sacrifice and struggle. I don't want to count pennies and worry about bills. Roberto offers me trips to Europe, fancy restaurants, designer clothes. He offers me the life a beautiful woman like me should have." Her vanity and materialism were now completely exposed, and I saw how even the most tolerant neighbors began to physically move away from her as if her attitude were contagious. Francisco cleared his throat and took another document from his inexhaustible folder. "There's something else you need to know," he said with professional gravity. Camille was not only planning to get a divorce and keep the house, she had also started the proceedings to claim alimony based on the lifestyle she believed Josiah had provided her with during these 3 years. He held out a legal form that clearly showed Camille's signature. She was requesting $1,800 a month in support, arguing that she had become accustomed to a standard of living that Josiah should maintain even after the divorce. The absurdity of the situation was so great that even in the midst of all the pain and betrayal, I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. $1,800 a month, I repeated, from a man who makes $1,300 a month to maintain a lifestyle that I was actually financing completely. I looked at Camille directly in the eyes and saw something that surprised me. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, there was a kind of desperate defiance in her gaze, as if she still believed she could find a way to emerge victorious from this situation. "This is all a plot!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "From the first day Josiah introduced me to you, I knew you hated me. You were never subtle about it. You always looked at me as if I wasn't good enough for your precious son." Her voice rose to a shriek that made several neighborhood dogs start barking in response. "You made up this whole story to separate us because you can't stand the idea that he chose me instead of staying attached to your apron strings forever." "You're right about one thing," I admitted calmly, and I saw her eyes light up for a moment, believing she had finally found a crack in my armor. "From the first day, I sensed something wasn't right with you. Call it maternal intuition, life experience, or simply the instinct of an older woman who has seen enough lies in her life to recognize them when she sees them." I walked one step closer to her, and she automatically backed up until her back hit the truck. "But I didn't make anything up, Camille," I just documented your own actions." Josiah had remained silent during this exchange, but I could see that he was processing every word, every revelation, every piece of the puzzle that was finally falling into place. "Mom," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion, "why didn't you tell me anything before? Why did you wait until we got to this point?" His question contained pain, but also understanding, as if he was finally seeing the situation from my perspective. "Because I had to be completely sure," I replied softly, feeling my own emotions threaten to overflow after months of holding them back. "Because accusing the woman you love of these things without absolute proof would have destroyed our relationship forever. Because I needed you to see the truth with your own eyes, not just believe me because I'm your mother." I approached him and put my hand on his shoulder, feeling it tremble slightly. And because despite everything she did, part of me hoped I was wrong. I hoped there was an explanation that wouldn't completely shatter your world. Francisco closed his folder with a definitive snap. "Mrs. Camille," he said formally, "I have here cessation documents that invalidate any claim you may have on the property in question, as well as temporary restraining orders that prohibit you from approaching the residence or contacting Josiah in any way, while the legal aspects of this situation are resolved." He held out the papers to her, but Camille looked at them as if they were venomous snakes. "You can't do this!" she screamed, but now her voice sounded more like a desperate whine than a real protest. "I have rights. We lived together for 3 years. That means something in the eyes of the law." She turned to the neighbors as if looking for support, but found only faces of disgust and disapproval. Even Regina, who usually sympathized with anyone who seemed to be under attack, had crossed her arms and was looking at her with clear antipathy. "Indeed, living together for 3 years means something in the eyes of the law," Francisco agreed in a professional tone. "It means that any debt accumulated during that time is shared responsibility, which includes the $23,000 in credit cards, the $18,000 in fraudulent loans, and the legal costs of resolving this situation." He paused dramatically as he consulted his notes. "However, given that all these expenses were incurred without Josiah's knowledge or consent, and considering the evidence of fraud and adultery, it is highly likely that you will be held completely responsible for all these debts." The color completely drained from Camille's face, as if someone had pulled a plug and all the blood had drained from her body. $41,000 in debt, plus legal costs, plus the complete loss of what she thought would be her financial security through the divorce. The reality of her situation finally began to penetrate the barrier of denial she had built around herself. "Roberto," she whispered suddenly, as if she had just remembered something crucial. "Roberto will help me. He has money. He can pay for all of this." But even as she said the words, she seemed to realize how unconvincing they sounded. A wealthy, married man who had been enjoying a secret affair would probably not be very interested in bearing the financial and legal consequences of his mistress's fraud. As if the universe had been waiting for that exact moment to add the final touch to this drama, Camille's phone began to ring. We all looked at the device sticking out of her fuchsia purse, and when she saw the name on the screen, her face underwent a transformation that would have been comical if it hadn't been so pathetic. "It's Roberto," she murmured, as if pronouncing the name were a magic spell that could save her from this whole nightmare. "He's going to explain everything. You'll see it's not how they're painting it." With trembling hands, she answered the call and put it on speakerphone, probably hoping her lover's voice would bring some kind of salvation to this impossible situation. "Roberto, my love, thank God you called. I'm in a terrible situation, and I need you to come and help me right now." Her voice had adopted a childish and supplicating tone that made me feel a mixture of disgust and pity for this woman who had clearly never learned to take responsibility for her own actions. The response that came from the phone was like a slap that echoed down the street. "Camille, I can't do this anymore. the male voice said in a cold, distant tone that showed no trace of the passion he had been feigning for months. My wife found out about our affair. She hired a private investigator. She has photographs, recordings, evidence of all the gifts I gave you. She's suing me for divorce and is going to take half of everything I own. There was a pause that felt eternal as everyone present processed the implications of those words. Camille stood completely motionless, like a statue of salt, while the voice continued to systematically destroy all her plans and hopes. Besides, my lawyer warned me that I could be implicated in any legal situation you have with your husband. I can't risk my business or my assets for this relationship. I'm sorry, but this has to end here. The sound of the line being cut was like the sound of a door closing definitively in Camille's face. The silence that followed was so absolute that you could hear the buzzing of the power lines overhead. Camille stared fixedly at her phone, as if she couldn't believe the words she had just heard were real. Slowly, very slowly, the complete reality of her situation began to manifest on her face. No Roberto, no Josiah, no house, no money, and with $41,000 in debt, she would have to pay a loan. "No," she whispered, shaking her head repeatedly. "No, no, no. This can't be happening. Roberto loves me. He told me we were going to be together forever. He promised he was going to take care of me." Her voice gradually rose to a desperate wail that made several neighbors look out their windows to see what was causing so much scandal on the street. Josiah slowly approached her, and for a moment, I thought maybe he was going to comfort her, that his good heart would lead him to feel pity for the woman who had been his partner for 3 years. But when he spoke, his voice had a firmness that I hadn't heard since he was a teenager defending his principles against his classmates' mockery. "Camille," he said calmly, "I want you to get your personal things from the house. You can take your clothes, your books, anything you brought when you moved in with me, but nothing else. Not the appliances, not the furniture, not the jewelry my mother lent you for special occasions." "But Josiah!" she screamed, grabbing his arm like a drowning person clinging to any floating object. "You can't do this. We're a couple. We've built a life together. You can't throw everything away because of your jealous mother." Her words sounded desperate and irrational, as if she still hadn't completely processed all the evidence that had been presented against her. "A life together," Josiah repeated, freeing his arm from her grip with a firmness that filled me with maternal pride. "Do you call this building a life together? Stealing from me? Lying to me? Deceiving me? Planning to abandon me after getting every last cent you could?" He moved away from her until he was out of her reach. "Everything I thought we had built together was a delusion. All the love I thought we shared was fake. All the future I imagined with you was based on lies." Francisco cleared his throat and addressed Camille with the authority of someone used to handling complicated legal situations. "Ma'am, I have here a temporary order that gives you 24 hours to collect your personal belongings from the residence under the supervision of a peace officer to ensure you don't take anything that doesn't legally belong to you." He held out the document to her, but Camille looked at it as if it were a death sentence. After that period, any attempt to access the property will be considered trespassing. The neighbors had begun to murmur among themselves with increasing intensity, and I could hear fragments of their conversations. "I never liked that girl. I always knew something was off. Poor Josiah, so hard-working and honest. What a disgrace for the whole family." The court of public opinion had reached its verdict, and Camille had been found guilty unanimously. Regina approached me with an expression of admiration I had never seen on her face before. "Monica," she said in a low voice, "you must have suffered so much during all these months, knowing the truth, but not being able to do anything until you had all the proof." Her words touched me deeply, because they captured exactly what it had been like to live with this terrible knowledge for so long. "How did you manage to keep your composure knowing that woman was slowly destroying your son?" "Because I love my son more than I hate injustice," I replied simply, feeling tears threaten to appear for the first time during this entire confrontation. because I knew that if I acted based on emotions instead of facts, I would lose any chance of saving him from this situation. I looked at Josiah, who was standing with his shoulders slumped and an expression of total exhaustion on his face. And because I knew he needed to see the truth for himself to be able to completely heal from this betrayal, Camille had started pacing back and forth like a caged animal, muttering incoherently about injustice, conspiracies, and how everyone was against her. Her transformation had been complete from the confident, manipulative woman who had orchestrated this elaborate deception to a desperate, disoriented creature who was finally facing the consequences of her actions. It was a spectacle that would have been satisfying if it hadn't been so sad to see a human being completely fall apart in public. "I'm going to fight this," she suddenly declared, turning to all of us with a determination that seemed completely disconnected from reality. "I'm going to get a lawyer. I'm going to prove that this is all a conspiracy to destroy my life. I'm going to prove that Monica manipulated all this evidence because she could never accept that her son chose me." Her words sounded like someone who had completely lost touch with reality, someone who preferred to create an alternate fantasy rather than accept the truth of her own guilt. Francisco smiled sadly and shook his head. "Ma'am, with all due respect, any lawyer you consult is going to tell you the exact same thing I'm telling you now. You have no case. The evidence against you is overwhelming, documented, and verifiable by multiple independent sources. Besides, the legal costs of trying to fight this would be much greater than simply accepting responsibility and trying to negotiate a payment plan for your debts." Josiah slowly walked toward me, and for the first time during this terrible confrontation, I saw tears running down his cheeks. They weren't tears of anger or frustration, but something much deeper. Tears of shame, regret, and a pain that I immediately recognized because it was the same pain I had felt when his father abandoned us so many years ago. "Mom," he said in a broken voice, "forgive me, please. Forgive me for everything I said, for all the times I doubted you, for all the times I defended Camille when you subtly tried to warn me about her behavior." I approached him and hugged him with all the strength I had, feeling his body tremble against mine. "There's nothing to forgive, son," I whispered in his ear, the words coming out broken by my own tears that had finally found their way to the surface. "You were just a man in love who trusted the wrong person. There's nothing wrong with having a noble heart, even when others take advantage of that nobility." I held him while he sobbed, this big, strong man who had once again become my little boy who needed comfort after a nightmare. "But I worked so hard," he murmured against my shoulder. "I felt so proud of what I thought we were building together. I woke up every morning thinking I was being a good man, a good provider, building a solid future with the woman I loved." His voice completely broke on the last words. How could I have been so blind? How did I not realize it was all a lie? The neighbors watched us with a mixture of respect and emotion that completely transformed the atmosphere of the street. What had begun as a spectacle of drama and scandal had turned into something much deeper. The testimony of a mother who had sacrificed her own comfort to protect her son, and of a son who was finally understanding the magnitude of the love he had received without even realizing it. Francisco discreetly approached and put his hand on my shoulder. "Monica," he said softly, "there's something else Josiah needs to know. Something you didn't want to reveal until this moment, because you hoped it wouldn't be necessary. Tell him about your diagnosis." I nodded, knowing the time had come for the most personal and painful revelation of all. "What diagnosis, Mom?" Josiah asked, pulling away from me slightly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand as he looked at me with confusion. "What is Francisco talking about?" His voice held a new note of panic, as if he couldn't bear one more surprise on a day that had already completely shattered his known world. "Son," I said softly, taking his hands in mine and feeling them tremble slightly. 6 months ago, the doctors found something during my annual physical, a tumor on my pancreas that doesn't have a very good prognosis. I saw his eyes widen with shock and horror, and quickly continued before he could interrupt me. "The treatments are expensive, very expensive. Between chemotherapy, radiation, and the surgeries I need, we're talking about approximately $100,000 over the next 2 years. Why didn't you tell me? He cried, pulling away from me as if my silence were a personal betrayal. How could you hide something so important from me? I'm your son. I have the right to know when my mother is sick. His anger was understandable but also painful, because it confirmed my worst fears about how he would react to this news. Because I knew exactly what your reaction would have been, I replied with the patience only a mother can have. You would have wanted to help financially. You would have insisted on paying for my treatments. You would have worked double and triple shifts to get the money. I paused, letting the implication of my words sink into his mind. And Camille would have found a way to steal every cent of that money too, leaving me without treatment and you completely broke. The realization hit Josiah like lightning. His legs buckled, and he had to lean against the truck to keep his balance. She would have stolen the money for your medical treatment, he whispered, as if he needed to say the words out loud to believe they were real. She would have let you die to maintain her lifestyle and her affair with Roberto. The magnitude of the evil he had been living with under his own roof finally manifested completely in his consciousness. Francisco opened his folder once more and pulled out an official medical document. That's why your mother decided to take control of the financial situation, he explained with professional gravity. Not only to protect you from exploitation, but to ensure that she had the necessary resources to fight for her life. He held out the paper to Josiah, who took it with trembling hands. The funds she has been using to maintain your house during these years are part of her savings for medical treatment. Camille, who had been listening to this whole conversation from her position near the truck, suddenly found her voice again. "That's not my fault!" she shrieked with a hysteria bordering on madness. "I didn't know she was sick. You can't blame me for something I didn't know." Her lack of empathy, even in the face of a terminal illness revelation, was so shocking that even the most compassionate neighbors physically backed away from her. "You're right," I said calmly, turning to her for the last time. "You didn't know about my illness. But that doesn't change the fact that you stole, you lied, you cheated, and you planned to financially destroy an innocent man who loved you with all his heart." My voice remained firm, despite the emotions churning inside me. "The fact that you didn't know about my cancer doesn't make your actions any less despicable. It just means that your wickedness is so natural that you don't need special motivations to exercise it." Josiah returned to my side and hugged me again, but this time his embrace was different. It wasn't the desperate hug of someone seeking comfort, but the protective hug of a son who finally understood that his mother had been fighting battles he didn't even know existed. "Mom," he murmured in my ear, "we're going to fight this disease together. We're going to use every cent that's needed. We're going to find the best doctors. We're going to do whatever it takes." "We already are, son," I replied softly, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in months. "The money is saved, the doctors are coordinated, the treatment plan is underway, and now, thanks to what happened today, I no longer have to worry about protecting you from someone who would have sabotaged all our efforts." I looked toward Camille, who was still standing next to the truck, like a shadow of the manipulative woman she had been that morning. Sometimes crises reveal blessings in disguise. Regina approached with tears in her eyes. "Monica," she said in a trembling voice, "everyone in the neighborhood is going to be praying for your recovery. And if you need anything at all, any help with groceries, cleaning, rides to medical appointments, you just have to ask." Her offer was immediately followed by a chorus of similar voices from all the other neighbors, creating a circle of support that made me understand that I had gained much more than I had lost in this confrontation. Francisco closed his folder definitively and turned to Josiah with a comforting smile. "Son," he said, "your mother is one of the strongest and most intelligent women I've met in my 20 years as an accountant and legal advisor. She orchestrated this whole situation not only to protect you, but to ensure that when the truth finally came to light, it would be irrefutable and complete." He paused, looking toward Camille, who was still muttering incoherently. Many mothers would have confronted this situation with emotions and screams. Your mother handled it with strategy, patience, and a precision that would have impressed any professional lawyer. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with golden and orange tones that seemed to symbolize the end of one era and the beginning of another, Josiah and I stood on my front step, watching Camille finally gather the few belongings she had left. A peace officer had arrived half an hour earlier to supervise the process, making sure she only took what legally belonged to her. It was a pathetic sight to see this woman, who had once walked through our lives with so much confidence and arrogance, now packing her things in trash bags because she didn't even have her own luggage. "I can't believe that for 3 years I lived with a complete stranger," Josiah murmured, breaking the contemplative silence we had maintained for the last 20 minutes. Every kiss, every hug, every "I love you" we exchanged. It was all built on lies so elaborate that I don't even know who that woman really is. His voice contained a mixture of sadness and relief, like someone who has finally woken up from a nightmare but still isn't sure the danger has completely passed. "Sometimes the people who know our weaknesses best are the ones who can most skillfully exploit them," I replied, putting my arm around his waist in a gesture I hadn't made since he was a teenager. "Camille studied your personality for weeks before she began her seduction. She knew exactly what kind of woman you would need to feel complete, what words to use to make you feel special, what behaviors to adopt so you would trust her completely." I paused, watching her struggle to close an overstuffed bag. The best con artists aren't those who deceive naive people, but those who deceive noble people by making them believe they have found true love. Francisco walked over from his car, where he had been on the phone with several clients and colleagues who needed updates on the legal proceedings that were coming. "The process is going to be simpler than we initially thought," he announced with a smile of professional satisfaction. "Roberto Alvarez is so desperate to avoid a scandal that he is willing to testify under oath about the exact nature of his relationship with Camille, including details about the money he gave her and the plans they discussed for the future." He adjusted his glasses as he consulted his notes. "His testimony will be crucial to establishing premeditation in the fraud, which means that Camille will not only face civil consequences, but possibly criminal ones." "Criminal consequences, too?" Josiah asked, his voice showing a mixture of surprise and something that sounded dangerously close to satisfaction. "Are you saying she could go to jail for what she did to me?" There was no malice in his question, just a genuine curiosity about whether justice really existed in situations like this. Identity fraud, forgery of documents, and theft of an amount greater than $5,000 are all serious felonies in this state, Francisco explained with the precision of someone who had handled similar cases in the past. "Additionally, there's evidence that she used your personal information to apply for credit without your knowledge, which constitutes identity theft." He looked toward Camille, who had clearly been listening to the conversation and now looked even paler than before. "Of course, if she cooperates completely with the return of the stolen funds and accepts a restitution plan, it's possible that prosecutors will consider lesser charges." Camille dropped the bag she was carrying and approached us with what was clearly her last desperate attempt at manipulation. "Josiah," she said in a supplicating voice, adopting that lost little girl expression she had used so many times before to get what she wanted. "I know I made terrible mistakes, but don't all the good moments we shared mean anything? Is the love we felt for each other, even if only at the beginning, worth nothing?" Her eyes filled with tears that seemed genuine, but after everything we had discovered, it was impossible to know if even those tears were authentic. Josiah's response was so firm and mature that it filled me with maternal pride. "Camille," he said with a calm that contrasted dramatically with her desperation, "the moments you consider good were based on lies that I didn't know about. Every time I felt happy with you, every time I thought we were building something real together, you knew it was all fake." He took one step closer to her, but his body language was that of someone maintaining emotional distance. "You can't ask me to value memories that were manufactured specifically to manipulate me." "But love can grow even when it starts in the wrong circumstances," she insisted, now literally clinging to his shirt as if it were a life raft. Maybe I started with the wrong intentions, but I came to love you for real. We can get through this together. We can go to couples therapy. We can work on rebuilding trust." Her voice rose to a near scream, and the peace officer discreetly approached to ensure the situation didn't escalate out of control. "Couples therapy," I repeated. And for the first time during this entire confrontation, I couldn't help but laugh with a mixture of disbelief and bitterness. To work on what, exactly? On how to steal more efficiently? On how to maintain extramarital affairs without being discovered? On how to forge legal documents more convincingly? My laughter transformed into something more serious and definitive. "Camille, there are certain lines that once crossed, there's no going back. And you didn't cross a line, you crossed an entire continent of betrayal." The neighbors who had been keeping a respectful distance during this final conversation began to gradually approach like flowers opening to the morning sun. Regina was the first to speak. "Josiah," she said, with the authority of someone who had lived long enough to recognize wisdom when she saw it, "your mother saved you from something that would have destroyed not only your financial future, but your ability to ever trust in true love." Her words resonated with a truth that even Camille couldn't refute. Claudia nodded vigorously as she approached from the other side. "In my 60 years of life, I've seen many toxic relationships, but I've never seen manipulation as systematic and calculated as this," she declared with the weight of experience behind her words. "That woman wasn't just stealing your money. She was stealing years of your life that you could have spent finding true love with someone who really valued you." Araceli, who had been discreetly documenting all the drama on her phone, approached with an expression of genuine admiration. "Monica," she said directly to me, "what you did today required a kind of courage that few mothers possess. You knew you could lose your son if he didn't believe you, but you risked that relationship to save him from something much worse." Her words touched me deeply because they captured exactly the emotional dilemma I had faced for months. Francisco cleared his throat and addressed the group with the formality that had marked his entire participation in this drama. "If you'll allow me a personal observation," he said, "in my 20 years of handling family disputes and fraud cases, I have rarely seen such a clear demonstration of maternal love combined with intelligent legal strategy." He looked directly at Josiah. "Your mother not only protected you, she taught you a lesson about discernment that will serve you for the rest of your life." Camille had gradually backed up until she was almost hidden behind the truck, clearly realizing that she had completely lost any sympathy or support she might have had. "This isn't over," she muttered, but her words sounded hollow and desperate. "I'm going to find a way to prove that this was all orchestrated to destroy me." Even as she spoke, she seemed to realize how ridiculous her vague threats sounded against the mountain of evidence that had been piled up against her. "Actually, Camille," Francisco said with the finality of someone closing a book, "this ended the moment you decided that fraud and betrayal were acceptable tools to get what you wanted." He held out a sealed envelope to her. "These are the final documents you need to sign. Once you do, you will have 24 hours to completely leave this area and establish a payment plan for your debts. After that, any contact with Josiah or Monica will be considered harassment, and appropriate legal action will be taken." As Camille took the envelope with trembling hands, Josiah turned to me with an expression that mixed gratitude, love, and something that seemed almost like reverence. "Mom," he said softly, "during the next months of your treatment, I'm going to be with you every step of the way. I'm going to take you to every medical appointment. I'm going to cook for you when you don't have the strength. I'm going to make sure you have everything you need to fight this disease." His voice broke slightly on the last words. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life being grateful for the fact that I had a mother who was wise and brave enough to save me from the worst decision of my life." The hug we shared in that moment, as the sun finished setting behind us and the first stars began to appear in the sky, was different from any hug we had ever shared before. It was the hug of two survivors who had navigated the most dangerous storm of their lives together and had emerged not only intact, but stronger and more united than ever. It was the hug of a mother who had fulfilled her most sacred duty to protect her son, and of a son who finally understood the depth of the love he had been receiving without even realizing it. When we finally separated, the neighbors had formed an informal circle around us, like silent witnesses to a reconciliation that had transformed what began as a confrontation full of drama into a demonstration of what true unconditional family love really means. And as Camille slowly walked away down the street, carrying her few belongings toward an uncertain future, we stood on our front step, knowing that although we had lost our illusions, we had gained something much more valuable: the truth, justice, and the confirmation that true love always finds a way to protect what matters most. 6 months after that afternoon that changed our lives forever, I'm sitting on my front porch watching Josiah finish painting the fence we had been putting off for years. The chemotherapy treatment has been tough, tougher than I expected, but each session becomes more tolerable knowing that my son is there, holding my hand and reminding me why it's worth fighting. The doctors say I'm responding better than expected, and although we still have a long way to go, there's reason to be optimistic. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, as if we had exorcised a ghost we didn't know was haunting our spaces. Josiah moved back in with me temporarily to help during my treatment, and we've rediscovered the simple joy of having dinner together every night, sharing stories about our day, and planning small projects for the future. It's strange how the loss of something false can make what's authentic shine more brightly. Francisco has become more than just our legal advisor. He has become a family friend who visits us regularly to make sure everything is in order and to share a cup of coffee while we discuss topics ranging from investments to life philosophy. He informed us last week that Camille finally accepted a plea deal that will allow her to avoid prison time in exchange for 5 years of probation and a restitution plan that will keep her paying off debts for the next decade. The neighbors have been incredible during these months. Regina organizes a meal schedule of homemade food that arrives at our door 3 times a week. Claudia accompanies me to medical appointments when Josiah can't get away from work. Araceli even started a prayer group in the neighborhood specifically for my recovery. It's beautiful to discover that when crises reveal the worst in some people, they also reveal the best in many others. Josiah has changed in ways that go far beyond simply moving on from a toxic relationship. There's a new maturity in his eyes, a wisdom gained through pain that makes him more cautious, but also more compassionate. He told me last week that a coworker asked him out, but he honestly explained that he needs time to fully heal before opening his heart to someone new. I want to make sure that the next time I tell someone I love them, it's because I really know that person, not because they've convinced me that I do, he said. Roberto Alvarez, we learned through Francisco, lost approximately half of his assets in his divorce and had to sell 2 of his restaurants to pay for legal costs. His ex-wife, apparently, turned out to be as smart as she was ruthless and had been documenting their affairs for years, waiting for the perfect moment to act. It's funny how justice sometimes comes from completely unexpected directions. My cancer has taught me things about life that I wouldn't have learned in any other way. Every sunrise feels like a gift. Every conversation with Josiah feels precious. Every small moment of normalcy becomes something worth celebrating. The irony is not lost on me. It took facing my own mortality to finally live with the intensity and gratitude I should have always had. Josiah has started taking night classes in business administration. He says he wants to expand his horizons beyond construction, not because there's anything wrong with honest work, but because he wants to ensure he has the tools to protect any family he might form in the future. I won't let anyone else take advantage of my good faith, he told me, and the determination in his voice filled me with pride. 3 weeks ago, while we were sorting through the belongings that Camille had left behind and never claimed, we found a diary hidden behind a drawer. The pages revealed a mind even more calculating than we had imagined. She had meticulously documented her plans to manipulate Josiah, including specific strategies to isolate him from me and techniques to keep him emotionally dependent. Reading those pages was like looking directly into the soul of an emotional predator, and I was deeply relieved to know that we had escaped that trap before it could cause irreparable damage. The entire neighborhood changed after the events of that day. People greet each other more warmly, conversations are deeper, and there's a sense of community that didn't exist before. It's as if we all witnessed something that reminded us of the importance of looking out for each other and being aware of the signs of danger in our families. This afternoon, as I watch my son work in the garden with that determined concentration he inherited from his grandfather, I feel a gratitude so profound it almost hurts physically. I saved my son from a life of exploitation and betrayal, but in the process, he saved me. He also saved me from the guilt of not having acted when I had the opportunity. He saved me from the sadness of watching the person I love most in this world be destroyed. Tomorrow, we start a new cycle of chemotherapy, but we face the future together, armed with the truth, strengthened by adversity, and united by a love that has been tested in the fire and has emerged purer than ever. And although I don't know what challenges await us, I know with absolute certainty that we will face them as a real family should, with honesty, courage, and an unwavering commitment to protect each other no matter the cost.